A country located in North America, rich in natural resources, is the second largest country in the world. The total population was around 34 million in 2010. The population is divided into multiple ethnic groups, including Chinese, other Asians, Latinos, and African Americans, among others. Canada is a confederation with parliamentary democracy, integrated by 10 provinces and 3 territories, all of them under the legislation of the 1982 Constitution Act, even though each province has its own legislation and federal courts. Economy. The Canadian economy is based on manufacturing, mining, and service sectors. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, showed a dramatic increase in trade and economic integration with the U.S., its main trading partner. Due to the great natural resources, skilled labor force, and modern capital plant, Canada has enjoyed solid economic growth. Now that we've gone over a brief summary of Canada, let's go through the concept of corporate governance. Corporate governance is the rules and practices that govern the relationship between the managers and shareholders of corporations, as well as stakeholders like employees and creditors. It contributes to growth and financial stability by reinforcement of market confidence, financial market integrity, and economic efficiency. Before talking about corporate governance, it is important to first take a look at the forms of corporate organization in Canada. Canadian law recognizes a number of forms in which business enterprises may be organized. These are laid down in 2 acts of the federal parliament and in parallel acts of the provincial legislatures. The principal forms of company organization are proprietorships, partnerships, privately held companies, publicly held corporations, crown corporations, a company whose shareholder is the government owning 50% or more, and nonprofit enterprises. The Canada Business Corporations Act. This is the principal statute, but the Canada Corporations Act is also often used for nonprofit organizations, foundations, and the like. All provinces have their own parallel acts, such as the Ontario Business Corporations Act and the Quebec Companies Act. Provincially, the most important statutes are the Securities Acts. Since Ontario is home to the most important stock exchange, its Securities Act is the most important and has been used as a model, in whole or in large part, by all other provinces. The provincial and territorial securities regulatory authorities coordinate their activities through the Canadian Securities Administrators, CSA, which is a voluntary umbrella organization of Canada's provincial and territorial securities regulators, whose objective is to improve, coordinate, and harmonize regulation of the Canadian capital markets. The CSA rules closely follow Sarbanes-Oxley and the consequential rules and guidelines established by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and U.S. stock exchanges. Except as may be set out in the corporate statutes or the constituted documents, boards of directors of Canadian companies have unlimited powers with respect to the supervision of the management of the company's business and affairs. The directors owe fiduciary duties of loyalty and care to the company. Considering shareholders' rights in Canada is important for being able to have a good corporate governance performance. Meetings. Canadian public companies must hold a general meeting of shareholders every 15 months to elect directors and to appoint auditors and to authorize their remuneration. Voting. Generally, shareholders are entitled to 1 vote per share. Election of directors. Any shareholder may nominate director candidates at a meeting of shareholders. Shareholder approvals and protections. Canadian courts have broad remedial powers under Canadian corporate statutes to intervene in transactions which are determined to be oppressive or unfairly prejudicial to shareholders. Canadian corporate governance is currently undergoing significant reform, influenced by recent U.S. initiatives such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the desire of Canadian securities regulators to maintain investor confidence. In the early 1990s, there was a growing feeling of dissatisfaction among Canadian investors and other interested parties with regard to the performance of boards of directors. In response, the Toronto Stock Exchange, TSE, created a committee under Peter Day, a former head of the Ontario Securities Commission. The result was 14 recommendations focused on the board of directors and its relationship with shareholders and management. The publication was released in 1994 and is commonly referred to as the Day Report. With it, Canada began its own modern attempt at assessing and improving the governance of publicly held corporations. The recommendations did not have the force of regulation, but companies were required, as a condition of listing on the TSE, to state whether they complied, and if not, why not. 5 years after the release of the GAY guidelines, a study revealed that in general the guidelines had become broadly accepted business practices. Disclosure. Canadian public companies are required to prepare, publicly disclose, and file with the securities regulatory authorities interim quarterly unaudited and annual audited financial statements and related management discussion and analysis, MD&A. The CEO and CFO must certify the interim and annual financial statements and related MD&A. Canadian public held companies are also required to prepare the Annual Information Form, which is a source of additional investor information not included in a company's annual financial statements. Canadian public companies are also required to prepare a management proxy circular. Other disclosure requirements: summary of the board and committee meetings, record of attendance to meetings by directors, immediate public disclosure of any change in the business, operations, or capital of the company. Insiders owning 10% or more of the voting securities of a company are required to disclose changes in their share ownership. The regulators are limited in the sanctions that they may impose for breaches of securities laws.